Hey guys, tonight we begin somewhere deeply personal and strangely public. Not on a battlefield, not in a royal court full of exhausted nobles pretending to enjoy lute music. Not even in a candlelit monastery where someone named Brother Thomas is quietly regretting every life decision that led him to copying manuscripts by hand for 12 hours a day. No, tonight we begin in a bed, a shared bed, with strangers. So dim the lights, settle into your blankets. Appreciate, for a quiet moment, the remarkable luxury of knowing exactly who is, or more importantly is not, currently lying beside you, because for most of history, privacy at night was less of a right and more of an occasional accident. Tonight, we drift gently into the strange, crowded, slightly sweaty world of shared sleeping arrangements. Inns packed with travelers, medieval households with entire families arranged like folded laundry, servants sleeping beside servants, workers beside workers, and sometimes complete strangers side by side, staring into darkness together while someone nearby snores with the confidence of a dying walrus. And the strange thing is, most people thought this was perfectly normal, which, historically speaking, is usually where things begin to get interesting. Now, let's wander slowly into medieval Europe. Night falls differently here. The world grows dark quickly. No electric lights. No glowing windows in neat suburban rows. Just candles, hearth fires, moonlight if the weather is feeling cooperative. And once darkness arrives, movement slows, because darkness in history is inconvenient in a very committed way. Roads become dangerous, stairs become suspicious. Furniture suddenly develops ambitions to injure your shins, so people gather indoors, and eventually they sleep, but not alone, rarely alone. The modern idea of a private bedroom would have seemed incredibly extravagant to many medieval people. A room dedicated entirely to sleeping for one person, with a mattress that belongs only to you. Very ambitious behavior. Most ordinary homes had limited space, 1 or 2 rooms, perhaps. Everyone shared warmth, air, noise, and occasionally opinions. Beds themselves were valuable objects. A proper bed frame, expensive. Mattresses stuffed with feathers, luxurious. Curtains around the bed, practically aristocratic theatre. Most people slept on straw mattresses, rough pallets, benches, or piles of blankets arranged with cautious optimism, and often together. Now imagine a small medieval house. The fire is dying low. A mother settles near one side of the room. Children squeeze beside each other under rough wool blankets. Someone coughs. Someone mutters in their sleep before actually falling asleep, which honestly feels impressive. The floor creaks softly. Outside, wind presses against wooden shutters, and inside, warmth matters more than personal space, because shared body heat is practical, romantic, not especially efficient. Absolutely. Now let us drift toward inns, because inns are where shared sleeping becomes truly ambitious. A medieval inn was not designed around comfort. It was designed around necessity. Travelers needed shelter. Roads were long. Darkness arrived early, and sleeping outside introduced you to weather, thieves, mud, and occasionally livestock with emotional problems. So people entered inns tired, very tired, and the innkeeper would assess the situation with the calm energy of someone already overwhelmed. Perhaps there were private rooms for wealthy travelers, perhaps, but most guests ended up in common sleeping spaces, large rooms, several beds, multiple strangers, one candle struggling bravely in the corner, and an atmosphere that can only be described as collectively exhausted. Now imagine arriving after a full day on horseback or on foot. Your boots are muddy. Your back hurts. A man you've never met is already asleep in the corner, making noises that suggest a complicated relationship with his lungs. Another traveler is removing socks with the emotional gravity of a religious ceremony, and the innkeeper points toward a bed already occupied by two people and says, essentially, there's room, which there technically is. In the same way a boat technically has room moments before sinking, but you are tired, so you climb in, because this is normal, or at least normal enough. Now here is something quietly fascinating. People in history often viewed sleep differently than we do. Today, sleep is private, personal, protected, but historically, sleep was communal. People talked before bed, shared stories, prayed together, complained together, listened to storms together, and importantly, they observed each other. You learned things about people through sleep. Who snored, who talked, who stole blankets with silent tactical precision, who woke up screaming because medieval life produced extremely stressful dreams, and this closeness created a strange kind of familiarity, even among strangers. Now let's gently introduce a traveler, a merchant, perhaps, middle-aged, slightly tired in a permanent way. He arrives at an inn carrying goods and letters. His knees hurt because roads are terrible. His horse dislikes him mildly, and honestly, the feeling is mutual. He pays for a place to sleep, not a room, a place, important distinction, and later that night, he lies beside a stranger already asleep under rough blankets. The room smells faintly of smoke, damp wool, and humanity, which is not ideal, but survivable. And as he stares upward into darkness, listening to unfamiliar breathing around him, this simply feels like part of life. Tomorrow he continues traveling. Tomorrow another stranger takes his place. The bed remains, steady, patient, slightly suspicious. Now let us float upward into castles, because surely nobles had privacy. Well, sometimes. But even noble sleeping arrangements were surprisingly crowded. Servants often slept nearby. Guards remained close. Ladies in waiting shared chambers. Important people rarely existed alone for long. Privacy around powerful individuals was oddly limited. Kings especially seemed incapable of being alone. Someone dressed them. Someone watched doors. Someone carried candles. Someone slept nearby in case the king required something urgent in the middle of the night. And what counted as urgent could vary dramatically. Perhaps war news, perhaps indigestion. History contains both with equal enthusiasm. Now imagine a noble household settling for the evening. Candles dim. Servants move quietly through corridors. Beds are prepared. Heavy blankets arranged carefully. And somewhere in the chamber, servants unroll simple bedding near the hearth, because they sleep there too, not in luxury, but close enough to respond if needed. Imagine trying to sleep while knowing someone important might wake you at any moment because they suddenly remembered a question about falconry, a difficult existence. Now let's drift towards something even stranger, the Great Bed of Ware, an enormous bed in England built during the late 1500s, a bed so absurdly large it became famous, large enough for multiple people to sleep together comfortably, which apparently sounded like excellent entertainment at the time. Visitors traveled to see it, because humans have always enjoyed looking at unusually large furniture, and yes, people slept in it together, sometimes several couples at once, which sounds less relaxing and more like a social experiment designed by exhausted innkeepers. But it became legendary, because shared sleeping was not inherently embarrassing, it was ordinary. Now let us gently wander into colder regions. Because winter changes everything. In winter, survival outranks comfort very quickly. Families gathered close for warmth. Animals were sometimes brought indoors. Beds became islands of shared heat against freezing nights. Imagine a small northern cottage. Snow outside, wind pressing hard against wooden walls. Inside, several people sleep tightly together beneath heavy blankets, while a fire weakens slowly beside them. There is very little elegance here, only practicality. And honestly, practicality usually wins history. Now here is another softly uncomfortable detail. Bed bugs, of course, because history refuses to let anyone rest completely. Shared beds meant shared pests. Inns especially developed reputations for insects that treated travelers like an all-you-can-eat buffet with surprisingly flexible opening hours. People complained about this constantly, and yet there were few alternatives. You endured it, because exhaustion is persuasive. Now let us glide gently into monasteries. Surely monks slept peacefully. Well, peacefully-ish. Monastic dormitories often involved rows of beds or pallets in shared halls. Simplicity mattered. Privacy did not. A monk might sleep surrounded by dozens of others beneath dim candlelight. And monasteries had rules, very specific rules. Rules about silence, rules about waking, rules about posture. History truly loved rules. Some monks even slept partially clothed and ready to rise immediately for nighttime prayers, because apparently even sleep needed discipline. Imagine trying to relax while knowing a bell could summon you into cold darkness at any moment. A stressful bedtime arrangement. Now let's gently return to ordinary people. A married couple in a small home, children nearby, perhaps grandparents too. One room, one fire, everyone arranged carefully according to warmth, status, age, and available floor space. The sounds of night filled the room slowly. Breathing, snoring, shifting blankets, the occasional distant dog barking at absolutely nothing. And despite everything, people slept. Humans adapt remarkably well, even to conditions that modern people would describe as deeply concerning. Now here is something quietly emotional. Shared sleeping also meant shared vulnerability. People rarely faced the night entirely alone. Fear, storms, illness, grief, all existed collectively. When someone was sick, others heard it. When someone cried quietly at night, others noticed. There is something strangely intimate about historical sleeping arrangements, not always comforting, not always pleasant, but deeply human. Now let us float briefly toward royal marriages, because these become unintentionally awkward very quickly. Royal couples rarely enjoyed total privacy either. Servants often remained nearby. Ceremonial bedding rituals sometimes involved witnesses to bedtime, because apparently monarchy believes nothing should remain simple. Nobles would escort newly married couples to bed in elaborate ceremonies filled with blessings, jokes, drinking, and truly alarming levels of public involvement. And afterward, attendants sometimes remained close, which makes modern wedding hotels feel wonderfully restrained. Now imagine being a nervous young royal expected to produce heirs while half the palace treats your marriage like a national infrastructure project. Very relaxing atmosphere. Now let's drift into the soft hours before dawn. The room grows colder. The fire weakens further. People shift unconsciously toward warmth. Someone steals more blankets than morally acceptable. A traveler snores louder. Another quietly gets up to relieve himself outside, stepping over sleeping bodies, with the precision of a man trying not to start a diplomatic crisis in the dark. And eventually, morning begins. Slowly, someone stirs the fire, someone coughs, light presses faintly through shutters, and another day starts. The strangers beside you become travelers again. The family resumes work, The servants begin chores, the messenger continues walking, and the bed waits patiently for night to return once more. Because in history, beds were not private escapes from the world, they were part of the world itself, shared, crowded, necessary, and strangely social. Now take a slow breath, let the image settle. A dark room, a warm blanket, the sound of unfamiliar breathing nearby, and generations of people sleeping side by side, simply because history gave them little other choice. In the next part, we'll drift deeper into nighttime life itself. Strange medieval sleep habits, segmented sleep schedules, candlelit routines, and the wonderfully odd things people believed happened after dark. But for now, rest easy. Your bed is probably yours alone, and no exhausted merchant is climbing under your blanket after arguing with a horse for 12 hours. Hey guys, tonight we begin very close to the ground. Literally. No towering castles yet, no velvet curtains, no oversized royal beds guarded by tiny, aggressive dogs named things like Sir Barkington. Tonight, we begin on the floor. A dirt floor, cold in winter, dusty in summer, occasionally damp for reasons no one fully understands, and, in the truly unfortunate houses, shared with a chicken that has somehow wandered inside and now considers itself part of the family. So dim the lights, settle into your very modern sleeping arrangement, appreciate your mattress, your pillow, your floor, which hopefully is not made of compacted earth and centuries of smoke residue, because tonight we drift slowly into the strangely normal world of sleeping on dirt floors. And for most people in history, this was just life. Now, when we picture the medieval world, people often imagine castles, candlelight, embroidered robes, dramatic goblets, and someone loudly announcing dinner for no clear reason. But most people were not nobles. Most people were peasants, laborers, servants, farm workers, and exhausted individuals who spent 12 hours dealing with mud, and then came home to more mud. History has a sense of consistency like that. So let us wander gently into a small medieval house, not large, not impressive, a single-room structure, perhaps, wooden beams darkened by smoke, walls made of wattle and daub, a roof that technically functions, although everyone inside remains emotionally prepared for leaks, and beneath your feet, dirt, packed hard from years of footsteps. This floor was not considered temporary. It was the floor, the official floor, the permanent arrangement. No polished wood, no stone tiles, certainly no heated flooring, because medieval people had not yet reached the stage of civilization where warm feet became a priority, which honestly feels like an oversight. Now imagine evening arriving. Outside, the air cools, animals settle. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks at absolutely nothing, continuing a tradition that has survived every century. Inside the house, firelight flickers softly. The family prepares for sleep, and this is where modern expectations quietly collapse, because there are no bedrooms. Not really. Privacy, in medieval life, was more of a rumor. People slept together, families together, sometimes servants nearby, sometimes animals nearby, sometimes everyone in one room, breathing heavily while the fire struggles heroically against the cold. And on the floor, straw. If things are going well, straw scattered across the dirt helped soften the surface slightly. It added insulation, a little warmth, a little comfort, and by comfort, medieval standards meant you probably won't wake up directly on a rock, which was considered progress. Now let us meet a family. A farmer, his wife, 3 children, possibly another relative whose exact relationship nobody fully explains, but who has simply always been there. The father lowers himself onto the bedding carefully. His back hurts. Of course it hurts. Medieval labor had a way of treating the human spine like an optional feature. His hands are rough, fingernails permanently carrying traces of soil, muscles tired in the deep, steady way that comes from repetitive work. Beside him, the children settle quickly. Children in history could sleep almost anywhere. Floor, bench, cot, probably a moving goat if necessary. Exhaustion creates flexibility. The mother adjusts blankets, simple wool, heavy, slightly scratchy, but warm enough when layered together. And then, quiet, not complete silence. There is always sound, the crackle of embers, wind pressing softly against the walls, the occasional shuffle of animals, someone coughing, someone snoring with impressive confidence, a baby murmuring briefly before falling asleep again. And underneath it all, the slow awareness of the earth itself beneath the house, steady, cold, present. Now here is something quietly strange. People did not necessarily think this was miserable. Difficult, yes. Uncomfortable sometimes, certainly. But normal. That is the important part. Humans adapt remarkably well to whatever they grow up around. If your entire village sleeps on dirt floors, then a dirt floor simply becomes part of existence. Like weather, or taxes, or that one neighbor who always explains things too loudly. Now, wealth changed things slightly. A richer household might have raised wooden sleeping platforms, straw mattresses, actual bed frames, and nobles, of course, drifted gradually toward absurd levels of sleeping luxury. Curtains around beds, feather mattresses, decorative fabrics, tiny carved details no one would ever notice while unconscious, because once humans discover comfort, they immediately begin competing over it. But even castles remained surprisingly cold. Stone walls held winter air with frightening commitment. Drafts moved through corridors like invisible ghosts with time management issues. So even noble beds required layers upon layers of blankets, furs, and servants constantly handling fires, which means that despite enormous social differences, everyone in medieval Europe was at least slightly uncomfortable most of the time. A strangely unifying detail. Now let us drift back downward, back to ordinary homes, because sleeping arrangements carried meaning. Position mattered. The warmest spots near the fire usually belonged to parents or elders. Children squeezed wherever space existed. Guests, if present, complicated everything immediately. Imagine arriving at a medieval home after dark, rain outside, roads muddy. You knock. The family lets you in because hospitality mattered deeply, especially in isolated communities. And now, someone must figure out where you sleep, which usually means somewhere on the floor, perhaps near the wall, perhaps beside a child who kicks aggressively in sleep, perhaps near the goat. Again, flexibility. Now, let us pause briefly on hygiene, or rather, the medieval interpretation of hygiene, because floors accumulated things, dust, ash, food scraps, moisture, animal traces, life, generally. Fresh straw helped. Sometimes herbs were scattered to improve smell. Lavender, if available, sweet rushes, plants that added a faint pleasant scent over the deeper historical reality underneath, which is honestly one of humanity's oldest strategies. Covering one smell with another smell and hoping confidence does the rest. Now imagine winter. This is where dirt floors become emotionally challenging. Cold rises upward relentlessly. The ground hardens. Moisture creeps through. Families huddle close together under blankets, while wind presses against walls that feel increasingly theoretical. The fire becomes central, not decorative, necessary. A medieval household without fire quickly stops feeling like a household and starts feeling like an apology. So throughout the night, someone might wake occasionally to tend the embers, add wood, adjust ashes, protect warmth, because warmth equals sleep, and sleep equals survival. Now here is another softly uncomfortable detail. Beds themselves were expensive, very expensive. Wood required labor, ropes required materials, mattresses required stuffing, everything required time. So for poorer households, sleeping directly on prepared straw over dirt simply made economic sense. Not ideal, but practical. History is full of practicality, defeating comfort with exhausting consistency. Now let us gently float toward monasteries for a moment, because monks, naturally, found ways to make sleeping even less comfortable on purpose. Some religious communities deliberately avoided soft bedding. Hard surfaces encouraged humility, or discipline, or spiritual focus, or perhaps simply deep familiarity with lower back pain. A monk might sleep on a simple mat over stone or dirt, wrapped in rough blankets, rising before dawn for prayer, while questioning absolutely none of his life decisions publicly. Privately, perhaps, different story, but outwardly, calm dedication. Now drift with me toward castles again, because servants also slept poorly. Large noble households often place servants in shared sleeping spaces near kitchens, corridors, or storage areas. Warmth mattered more than privacy. A kitchen servant might curl beside cooling ovens, because residual heat made the difference between comfort and shivering all night. Meanwhile upstairs, a noble slept beneath embroidered blankets, discussing philosophy earlier that evening, while someone else carried chamber pots for them. Civilization has always relied heavily on unequal sleeping arrangements. Now imagine the sounds at night inside a medieval structure. Not silence, never silence. Wood creaks constantly, animals shift, people breathe, somebody snores, someone mutters in dreams, wine slips through gaps, rain taps softly overhead. A fire settles into low glowing orange, and through it all, bodies rest directly above the earth. There is something strangely grounding about that, literally grounding. Modern life separates us from nature beautifully. Insulation, flooring, heating systems, memory foam, entire industries dedicated to preventing humans from experiencing even slight discomfort. Meanwhile, medieval peasants lay 3 inches above dirt thinking, well, at least it's not raining indoors tonight. Expectations shape happiness in powerful ways. Now let us gently meet another figure, an older woman, widowed perhaps, living alone in a smaller cottage. Her sleeping area is simple. A straw pallet near the fire, a wooden stool nearby holding a candle and a few possessions. She lowers herself slowly at the end of the day, joints aching softly with age and labor. Outside, winter moves through the village. Inside, the room glows faintly amber from dying embers. And despite everything, there is peace here. Not luxury, not comfort in the modern sense, but familiarity, routine, the quiet relief of another day ending safely. History often feels brutal when viewed from a distance, but up close, most lives were built from small ordinary moments. Eating, working, resting, sleeping, waking again. Now let us drift briefly into travel, because travelers had even fewer guarantees, and it might provide shared sleeping spaces where strangers rested side by side on rough bedding scattered across floors, snoring symphonies echoing through dark rooms, boots piled nearby, cloaks used as blankets, someone talking in sleep, someone grinding teeth like they are personally angry at bread, and everyone simply accepting this because the alternative is sleeping outside, which was worse, usually. Now here is something quietly important. People spent far more time physically connected to their environments. The texture of ground, the temperature of air, the smell of smoke, the feeling of dampness creeping upward through straw. Modern life filters these experiences away. Medieval life did not. You felt the season directly. Winter entered your bones personally. Summer settled into every surface. Rain changed the smell of your home. The earth beneath you remained part of daily existence. And at night, you slept on it, or very close to it. Now let us gently float toward the emotional side of all this, because despite discomfort, shared sleeping created closeness too. Families talked quietly before sleep. Stories passed between generations. Children listened to adults discussing weather, crops, neighbors, worries. Life unfolded communally. No private scrolling through glowing screens. No headphones. No separate bedrooms isolating everyone into individual silence. Just people together in one darkened room while firelight faded slowly. There is something ancient and deeply human in that image, even if the floor itself remains objectively terrible. Now evening deepens further. The fire burns low. Outside, the medieval world settles into darkness. No streetlights, no distant traffic hum, only night, heavy and complete. Inside the cottage, bodies rest beneath wool blankets, the earth below them cool and unmoving. Tomorrow will arrive early. There will be fields to work, water to carry, animals to feed, endless tasks waiting patiently. But for now, rest, simple rest, and slowly, one by one, everyone drifts into sleep. Now take a slow breath. Let the image settle. A small medieval room, smoke-darkened beams, a fading fire, straw spread over packed earth, and ordinary people sleeping quietly above the ground that shaped their entire lives. No luxury, no recognition, no dramatic speeches, just exhaustion, warmth, and another night survived. Hey guys, tonight we begin in the quiet hours, the strange hours. The hours where history becomes slightly uncomfortable and humanity starts making decisions that only make sense if you live in a castle with no electricity and too much candle smoke. So dim the lights, pull the blanket a little closer. Appreciate your modern nighttime routine. Maybe you brush your teeth. Maybe you scroll your phone for 20 minutes longer than intended, while pretending you are just checking one thing. Very normal, very modern. But tonight, we drift backward into a world where bedtime involved chamber pots, prayer benches, heated bricks, suspicious herbal drinks, and entire households slowly preparing themselves for darkness like nervous woodland creatures. Because strange night routines were everywhere in history, and once the sun went down, people became wonderfully odd. Now, the first thing to understand is this: night used to feel enormous. Modern darkness is soft, controlled, decorative, even. Streetlights glow, screens shine. Refrigerators hum quietly in the background like supportive little robots. But medieval darkness, that was serious darkness, the kind that swallowed roads completely, the kind that made forests feel emotionally aggressive, the kind where a single candle suddenly became the most valuable object in the room. So as evening approached, entire households shifted into preparation mode. Let us wander into a medieval town. The sun lowers slowly behind rooftops, market noise fades, animals settle, and one by one, people begin closing shutters, not casually, carefully, because night-time was not just inconvenient, it was uncertain. Thieves moved in darkness, fires spread easily, drunk people made emotional decisions, involving singing and occasionally swords, so families prepared themselves. Doors locked, candles trimmed, ashes adjusted in the hearth, and then came the nightly rituals. Now imagine a small house. A mother hangs herbs near the fire, rosemary perhaps, lavender if they are fortunate, maybe mugwort, because medieval Europe absolutely loved turning random plants into solutions for everything. Trouble sleeping, herbs, bad dreams, different herbs, possibly the same herbs. Nobody was entirely sure. A father checks the fire carefully before bed. Not too large, not too small, because a weak fire means freezing, but a strong fire means the house may accidentally stop being a house sometime around midnight. A difficult balance. And nearby, children prepare for sleep in the strange communal style history enjoyed for centuries. several children together, one bed if fortunate, straw pallets if not, occasionally arranged sideways like human luggage, because space mattered. Now let us drift upward into a castle. Nighttime routines among nobles became much more elaborate. Of course they did. Wealth has always created additional steps for absolutely everything. A noble woman prepares for bed. Servants surround her quietly. Candles flicker against stone walls. Heavy dresses are removed layer by layer in a process so complicated it resembles the careful unpacking of decorative furniture. Pins removed, jewelry stored, hair brushed endlessly. Honestly, medieval hair routines alone could qualify as a full-time occupation. And during all this, conversation continues softly. Court gossip, concerns about alliances, someone quietly mentioning that Lady so-and-so wore entirely the wrong color at dinner, which apparently remains devastating news. Humans truly have not changed much. Now here is something softly strange. Many nobles slept partially sitting up, especially in later centuries, because lying completely flat was associated with death, and nobody wanted to look overly committed to the concept while still alive. So beds became piled with pillows, large wooden frames, curtains drawn around them to trap warmth, a sleeping arrangement that looked less relaxing and more like someone recovering from dramatic emotional news. And nearby, servants often remained close through the night, not in the bed, hopefully, but nearby, waiting, because nobles occasionally woke suddenly needing things: water, candles, blankets adjusted, news delivered, comfort provided. The medieval upper class had an impressive ability to convert ordinary moments into group activities. Now let us float toward monasteries, because monks had deeply specific nighttime routines. A monastery after dark feels quiet in a very complete way. Stone corridors, cold air, soft candlelight moving across walls, and somewhere in the darkness, bells, always bells. Monastic life revolved around strict schedules of prayer, including nighttime prayers, which means monks regularly woke in the middle of the night voluntarily. An astonishing level of commitment, honestly. Imagine sleeping peacefully when suddenly, bell, time to wake up and walk through freezing corridors for prayer. No complaints, no 5 more minutes, just sandals on stone floors and sleepy chanting beneath candlelight. A modern office worker would collapse emotionally within 2 days. Now let us gently wander into another strange nighttime habit: the first sleep and second sleep. Because for much of history, people often did not sleep straight through the night. Instead, they slept in 2 parts. First sleep began after dark. Then people woke naturally sometime around midnight, not briefly, fully awake. And during this quiet middle period, they did things: prayed, talked, visited neighbors, added wood to fires, thought about life, probably regretted soup choices occasionally. Then, eventually, they returned to bed for second sleep, which means insomnia, historically speaking, may have just been normal human behavior interrupted by modern schedules. A medieval peasant waking at 1 a.m. would not panic. He would simply sit quietly for a while staring into firelight thinking about sheep. Honestly, not the worst system. Now let us drift into colder regions. Winter nights became entire survival experiences. A family in Northern Europe prepares carefully. Animal skins layered over bedding. Hot stones wrapped in cloth placed beneath blankets. Bodies sleeping close together for warmth. Even nobles relied heavily on shared body heat. Romantic paintings rarely mention this part, but history was cold, very cold, and warmth outranked dignity surprisingly quickly. Now imagine a servant moving through dark corridors, carrying heated pans filled with coals. Bed warmers, a wonderfully comforting invention that also carried the slight possibility of accidental disaster, because medieval life often balanced practicality and danger very closely together. A servant slides the warming pan beneath blankets. Smoke drifts lightly upward. The noble bed becomes temporarily less hostile. Success. Now let us float toward royal paranoia, because kings had extremely strange nighttime habits. A king rarely slept alone emotionally, even if physically alone. Guards outside doors, servants nearby, advisors lingering late, food sometimes tested for poison, candles burning through the night. Some rulers became deeply obsessed with nighttime safety. And honestly, given medieval politics, fair enough. Imagine being a king in a stone castle, trying to sleep peacefully, while half your relatives quietly consider replacing you. Not ideal conditions for deep rest. One French king reportedly slept surrounded by layers of security and religious objects, while physicians argued over the ideal room temperature, like very anxious interior designers. Meanwhile, peasants nearby slept directly beside chickens, without concern. History distributes stress unevenly. Now let us wander gently into ordinary superstition. Night belonged to uncertainty. People believed strange things moved after dark. Spirits, demons, witches, fairies with deeply questionable intentions. Entire bedtime routines developed around protection. Prayers spoken carefully. Symbols placed near doors. Charms hung above beds. Parents whispering blessings over children before sleep. And candles remained important. A small flame pushing back enormous darkness. There is something deeply human about that image. Now picture an old woman in a tiny cottage. She finishes her evening carefully, adds herbs to the fire, touches a small wooden cross hanging beside the bed, whispers familiar prayers learned decades ago, then lowers herself slowly onto rough bedding. Outside, wind moves through trees. Inside, firelight glows softly against worn walls. And despite the strange beliefs, despite the cold, despite the discomfort, there is peace here too. Routine creates peace, even unusual routines. Now let us drift towards cities. Night in medieval cities sounded different, not quiet exactly, muted, footsteps echoing on narrow streets, distant voices, dogs barking. Somewhere a drunk man explaining politics badly. Again, timeless behavior. Watchmen moved through streets carrying lanterns, calling out hours, checking for fire. Because urban fire terrified everyone, one overturned candle could erase entire neighborhoods. So nighttime vigilance mattered enormously, and many people slept lightly because of it. Half alert, always listening slightly. Now here is another strange detail. Chamber pots. Yes, we must acknowledge them gently, because history certainly could not avoid them. Most households did not involve nighttime. Trips outdoors, unless absolutely necessary. Darkness plus medieval streets created poor conditions for elegant movement, so chamber pots existed beside beds. Practical, unpleasant, universally accepted. And in the morning, someone dealt with them, usually not the noble. A pattern history repeated constantly. Now let us float into the emotional rhythm of night itself. Without modern distractions, evenings stretched differently. People talked more, sat quietly more, listened to storms, watched fires. Night encouraged stillness. A family might spend an hour simply sitting together while candlelight flickered across walls. No entertainment except conversation, memory, and thought. And honestly, After endless labor during the day, silence probably felt luxurious. Now imagine a young servant at night, finally alone for a moment. After serving nobles all evening, she sits near fading kitchen warmth, eating leftover bread slowly, listening to distant castle sounds becoming softer. Her feet ache, her shoulders ache, everything aches slightly, because medieval labor respected absolutely nobody's joints. But now the work is done. For today, she curls into simple bedding near the kitchen wall, still smelling faintly of smoke and bread, and sleep comes quickly, because exhaustion remains humanity's most reliable sleeping medicine. Now let us gently move toward one final strange ritual: dream interpretation. People care deeply about dreams. A strange dream could feel meaningful, important, possibly divine. Someone dreams of water. Discussion follows. Someone dreams of wolves. Concern immediately increases. Entire books existed explaining dreams in wonderfully confident detail despite absolutely no evidence that anyone understood dreams at all. A timeless human tradition. Now night deepens fully. Candles burn low. Castles quiet gradually. Villages disappear into darkness. Roads empty. And across the medieval world, millions of people settle into their strange familiar nighttime routines. A monk rises for midnight prayer. A servant collapses onto straw bedding. A noble adjusts embroidered blankets. A watchman walks slowly through cold streets. A peasant wakes briefly, between first and second sleep to stare thoughtfully into dying firelight. And somewhere, inevitably, someone snores loudly enough to affect multiple generations. Now take a slow breath. Let the images settle softly. The candles, the stone walls, the whispered prayers, the strange herbal remedies, the heavy blankets,